Welcome to All Things Chiropractic.
Well, welcome to another episode of All Things Chiropractic.
Another one.
Yeah, I'm Paul Andrews.
Dr. Mark Davini.
And today it's about a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. What a great line from Romeo and Juliet, I think.
Billy was a good guy.
Yeah. Billy the Bard, right? So it's really about what's a subluxation, right? And most chiropractors are stopping short in their cars. They're stopping everything because they're like, this seems pretty easy. Or I know the answer to that, right? But
do you?
But do you, right?
Yeah. That's what we're going to investigate.
Yeah. So I remember back years and years ago when I was working with a trade association and they were developing this whole marketing, branding. They're going to, provide pamphlets and all kind of websites and everything to their members, right? It was great. But do you know that the brochure, which started off with two questions and answers. First one was, what is chiropractic? And the second one was, what is a subluxation? Do you know how many months that took to come to an agreement between doctors
Not even
of all...
agreement, a consensus.
Consensus,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
Of all ages, all different schools they went to. As a non-chiropractor, and back then a real, sort of green in the profession, I was completely shocked at how diverse the understanding, the definitions, the rationales for people that went to the same schools too. It's just, even from the same, striking distance of their generations, it's like, I couldn't believe how challenging and how many months. It took almost 6 months.
Yeah. Well, there are as many definitions of subluxation as there are chiropractors, unfortunately. And we wonder why the public is confused about who and what we are, right?
So yes, that is so true. What's funny is doing research for a different episode of All Things Chiropractic podcast, and I've been doing billing for a long time. I came across the American Medical Association's CPT assistant actually provided a definition of what a subluxation is in chiropractic. This was back in October of 2009, and I was like, wait a minute, what? You guys are trying to do this. Okay. Here's what they had to say. Subluxation, as defined in chiropractic medicine, is a complex of functional and or structural and or pathological articular changes that compromise neural integrity and may influence organ system function and general health. Subluxation.
Wow.
It's a mouthful, and they're not even done. Subluxation puts pressure on delicate nerves and can slightly misalign the spinal column, resulting in the alteration of sensation and or somatic dysfunctions. What a mouthful.
I'm not even sure a chiropractor could say that better.
Really? Challenge out there. They're all swarming to the website now to give you feedback.
It included all of the elements of what should be in a chiropractic definition of subluxation. So,
okay, but are you going to put that on a pamphlet for someone like me, a layperson, to read?
Oh, no. We're tools of practice. We found a much easier way to say it, for sure. If we were to talk about, and we will in a few minutes, about the need to clearly define this. When people look at this word, like, what's that submarine word? I don't know what that means. Obviously we go into our little chiropractor mode and we go, oh, subluxation. Well, luxation is a dislocation and sub means less than. So, we have a less than a dislocation, and that's what I adjusted these, less than dislocations. Some of the old DD books and BJ books used to call it the chiropractic luxation. In some phrases.
That sounds almost like luxurious, like high end. I have a high end subluxation. It's really a chiropractic luxation. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Back in 2012, they did a survey and they found out that only 43% of chiropractic offices use the term subluxation in their procedure and practices.
That was like 13 years ago?
Yeah.
Do you think that number is higher or lower today?
I'm going to say lower.
Why? Why do you think?
there was a period of time that they made us shy away from using that term, saying, "Oh, if you use that term, you're not going to get paid, or you're not going to do this, or no one's going to accept you." And I am here at this point in time to say, get over it. Number one, we shouldn't be arguing with ourselves about something as fundamental as what we do. We should all come to a nice unified opinion about what it is. But that all set aside, let's at least back it up by state laws, which very commonly use the word subluxation or some descriptive nature of it that defines the subluxation, like the CPT definition you just read. But also think about Medicare. Medicare has assigned a whole code set that basically they say represents the chiropractic subluxation. They use the word. So
are you going to start making me like Medicare right now?
In this particular case, we're going to say this is a good thing because Medicare is the only one that clearly defines or clearly uses the term subluxation and clearly assigns it to chiropractors only. We're the only ones. We own it in the Medicare world. So I'm going to back up by saying if it's good enough for the feds, it's good enough to put this discussion to rest. Chiropractors treat subluxations of the spine.
Okay. And let's say that you inspire 100% of chiropractors around the nation to embrace and use this word. The problem becomes, what is their definition versus your definition? Why isn't there a unified definition?
This is our biggest problem as a profession. So I think we should work backwards. If we read other definitions of subluxation, and those of you that have R.W. Stevenson's book, written back in 1927, by the way, a subluxation is the
Mark
condition.
was around then, right?
Yeah, that was during my high school years.
One of your contemporaries.
Yeah. I knew him well. Yeah, Billy and I were good.
Yeah.
A subluxation is the condition of a vertebra that has lost its proper juxtaposition with the one above or the one below or both, to an extent less than a luxation, which impinges nerves and interferes with the transmission of mental impulses. Hippocrates, going back even further than Stevenson, and no, I wasn't around at that point. Okay, Hippocrates said, in the first place, the structure of the spine should be known for the knowledge it is the requisite for many diseases. So we're basically talking about an all-encompassing thing that involves more than just a fixated joint. Tools of practice are one-liner that we advocate so strongly to have in your office so that patients can understand, because they certainly wouldn't understand what we just said. But if you just say it's a misaligned vertebra causing nerve interference resulting in altered function.
Hey, I like that.
Simple, straight, and easy.
Right. Copyright Mark Davini, DC.
There we go. There you go. But what's the commonality of all these definitions? The nervous system and loss of function. So let's work backwards. So if we can't come to a complete consensus, the one thing I will advocate out there is that a subluxation is not just a fixation. The old sayings that every subluxation is fixation, but not every fixation is a subluxation. A subluxation is not just a misalignment, because anybody who doesn't have an absolutely perfect spine, it could be argued that every vertebrae in the spine is misaligned because they're not in perfect alignment. So it is not just a misalignment. So it's not just a joint fixation. It's not just a misalignment. There has to be a functional component to the subluxation, which is that whole discussion of vitalistic versus mechanistic, which we've mentioned in other podcasts, that if you just believe that a subluxation is a misalignment that has fixation, it's a very mechanistic approach, and it doesn't incorporate the loss of function. And in this case, or in many cases, in all of definitions of subluxation, loss of function of the nervous system in one way or the other, either too much or too little in a sense. Not all loss function. It could be, irritated or whatever. It could be a hyper functioning of the nervous system or a decreased functioning of the nervous system. But we could say it's an interference with the nervous system. So when we work backwards on this definition, we know that it will likely incorporate fixation. It will likely incorporate misalignment. two components of part for Medicare.
Ooh.
Which part can be a whole other discussion in a whole other podcast. But it also incorporates some loss or some interference with some part of the body's functions. So let's work backwards. We have three components right there. We have a misaligned vertebra that is fixated that results in loss of function.
So without calling out chiropractic schools, they have a lot to teach these doctors. Do you think that some of this lack of unified definition starts there?
Absolutely. Some of them take such a mechanistic approach to the subluxation concept that they refuse to even acknowledge the word exists. And to me, if you were that mechanistic that you refuse to acknowledge some type of interference with some other system's function, you should just go to physical therapy school.
Well, I mean, again, I'm not a chiropractor, I'm not a doctor, but as an educated layperson and a massage therapist, it's not a huge leap to say anatomically looking at the vertebra that if there's even a subtle misalignment, there might be some nerve interference based on what is the structures and the adjacent structures.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And nobody argues that point. All the way back to Hippocrates.
Right. So how do we get unified as a profession on something so basic?
Again, we have to probably start a movement here because you're not going to change a school's mind. You're going to have to change the minds of those that are out there practicing. And again, back in 2012, if only 43% of the offices were using the term, and we think that's probably less today if they were to repeat that survey, it's time that we all just embrace it. Medicare embraces it. Why can't we? So if we start putting together a similar message that incorporates similar concepts so that when a patient goes from one chiropractor to the other because they've moved, we know they always love you and they'll stay with you forever.
Of course.
But if they go from one concept to the one chiropractor to the other, they're not going to be told a whole different story, which we know happens. It's bad enough that we have a million gazillion techniques. So it's not even the idea that we could say that there's a consistency in how we do what we do. And here's an interesting thought. You could go to two chiropractors and they won't even say the same level is subluxation.
I was going to ask you that question, right? You put 10 chiropractors in the room with the same patient face down, and they do their pre-adjustment analysis, palpations, whatever. Why don't they all come up with the same subluxation levels?
I have no answer for that because to me, if a subluxation is a true entity that exists, like appendicitis, we should all find it and we should all find the same thing. But we don't. We analyze patients differently. We have techniques that address what we find, and the patient gets well. No wonder they don't understand what we do, because we don't understand what we do. So the concept of the subluxation, at least in broad strokes, we have to come to a consensus on. And then once we come to that consensus, we have to be able to use a criteria that we all have a consensus on to find those subluxations. Then technique and talent and skill and whatever is left up to the individual. But it is an inconsistency, and it is a reason why we get criticized a lot by other professions, that we can't find the same thing. Not only can we not find the same thing, we won't even define it as the same thing. So the profession can be absorbed, like osteopathy was absorbed into medicine, by muting a lot of what we're talking about here to the point where it no longer has any meaning, or as a profession we can move toward trying to more clearly define what it is we do, why we do it, and what's the best way to do it. Now we're distinct.
So, I've often heard that chiropractic is it's art, it's science, and philosophy, right? So there's three components, just like a subluxation would have three components.
Mm.
And chiropractic as a profession is fairly young still, I mean, it's certainly gone through some growing pains and it certainly evolves. But do you think that part of the reason why you can't reproduce the same results with 10 chiropractors in a room is because the fact that it's not just science, there is a philosophy and an art, and their approach is different because they were taught at different schools, they embrace different techniques and modalities and different analysis, and there's a lot that may go into it beyond just the pure anatomical, touch.
Absolutely. But it also begs the question that is subluxation a concept or a reality? Right now, the subluxation, as we see it evidenced by the practice of chiropractic by chiropractors, it's more conceptual than reality, because I'm going to examine you and come up with a C1, and someone else is going to examine you and come up with C5, which means that as a distinct anatomical pathological entity, it truly doesn't exist, or we would all find the same things, or to flip the script, we don't know what we're doing yet.
Or, like I think, everything's just a glitch in the matrix in the first place.
There you go. Yeah. They hit F1 and that's it. We're all going to be something different, right?
It's time for a reboot. Yeah, exactly.
So you could see where, as a profession, we have some work to do here. We have to be able to redefine our profession in a way that will propel us into the future rather than keep watering down what we do and make it so that we become absorbed.
So this brings us to our members' moment. And this one's really about what we've been teaching, what CEUs we have out there, what in-person, classes we've been doing, both for CAs and for doctors. And it plays back into this in your world, right? In your office, in your little microcosm of the world. Do you have that unified message, understanding, definition, you name it? Now, it may not be the very efficient definition that Tools of Practice has out there, but whatever it is, do you have that as a unified message in your office so that if it's you or your CAs or whomever out there as ambassadors, are they exposing people to the same message you would be if they walked into your office?
Right. And that's critical, because for right now, as a profession, we can't define things as clearly as they need to be, as we just discussed. But in your office, you can. And that message that you give your patients should be clean. It should be clear. It should be like that elevator speech. You got 30 seconds in an elevator to tell people what it is you do and why you do it and how it helps them. If you can't do that, if your staff can't do that, then you need to work on that, because that's what you want to say, and then make sure everything else in your office says the same thing. If you're going to preach wellness, you don't have posters all over your office talking about all the different kind of pains you can help, unless you want to be a symptom-based practice, which is fine. Then that makes sense. So just be consistent. Make sure that the message that you're sending is, number one, clear and concise. Number two, everybody in your office knows it and knows how to say it the same way. And number three, everything about your office supports that, because people don't get the message just by saying it once. It has to be reinforced over and over and over again.
It made me think about associates, right? Because if you got a doctor in your office, how does the patient understand if they're for convenience, they go into either doctor, whoever's better for their schedule, and they're getting different information, or they're feeling the techniques differently, or well, the other doctor doesn't adjust me there, and you have, and
exactly. This is all part of the team building. You all sit around, and as you maybe the doctors have to get together and go, what is your clinical approach? What is your clinical analysis process? Maybe we should have an office analysis process so that we're all consistent with what we do. And if you have someone that's so diametrically different from you, maybe that's not your best associate. And truthfully, If they are, I can guarantee you they won't be there that long because they're just learning what they need to learn so they can go on and do it themselves. The practices that have associates that thrive are the ones that are interchangeable to certain degrees, minus some individuality, of course. But pretty much they're going to go on a Monday, go to Dr. A, come back on a Wednesday, go to Dr. B, and get something very similar, or at least close enough where a patient will just pick based on personality and which one they happen to like best, not because this one's better at it or this one does something that the other one doesn't do, and I feel better when I go to this one instead of that one.
And I'm thinking it all ties together because if you're a doctor out there and you don't do listings or sides and levels and you've got an associate and what you're doing is working for that patient, how is that associate going to follow if it just says cervical adjustment?
Well, let's go to my bane of my existence that we mentioned, before in another podcast, that it was the manual therapy code for you.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's documentation.
Yeah.
Documentation is the next thing. And one of the future podcasts, we're going to have to talk about where chiropractors just have to get over it.
Do you think that would be a boring podcast, documentation?
Yeah, the way we're going to do it.
No, I don't think so. No. Challenge accepted out there.
Challenge accepted, yes.
We'll have to title it something other than documentation or they won't even hit play.
Yeah, I know. I know. They won't even hit play on that one. They don't want to hear it. Because, again, going back when we talked about chiropractic through time, which is really literally our first true podcast, and we talked about the evolution of why we are the profession has such resistance to documentation. It's an interesting story as a chiropractor anyway, to at least recognize that there is an evolution. There is an organic reason why we don't like documentation, but that's a whole other discussion.
Do you think that's changed over time, though? Not to digress a little bit, but I'm thinking about, chiropractors of old, no offense. They were rogues. They were independent, solo, professionals that, because they had to in the beginning, and then over time, they were just independent thinkers and individuals that didn't tend to work with. They didn't have opportunities to work together, right? Like the hospital systems and the other professions that you can work together more so. So, do you think that's changing over time too, though?
Oh, it has definitely changed, and we'll say the motivation of the chiropractors. Everything we talked about in this podcast about developing the concept of a subluxation and developing techniques to identify subluxations that would be consistent. Those kind of challenges would have easily been met by the pioneers. In fact, they did it. We had techniques that were clearly defined. You had Thompson technique, Gonstead technique. We had all these different techniques that if you followed the protocol and you were strict adherence to the protocols, more than likely you were going to come close to finding the same things and you were going to do them a specific way. Unfortunately, now the named techniques, for lack of a better description, the named techniques have fallen out of vogue. And what we have is, I don't even know what we have anymore.
It's a mishmash of
I go to
diversity
chiropractors and I get adjusted, and I've been adjusted by hundreds of chiropractors because it's my thing. I want to know the difference. And I know I'm in trouble when I walk into an office and I ask the chiropractor for an adjustment, and the first words out of their mouth is, "Where does it hurt?" And I look at them and go, "Why does that matter?" And then I'm in a place I don't want to be as far as my chiropractor goes.
Sure.
So yes, there's a lot of changes, and hopefully what we discussed here today will at least influence your thinking a little bit to try and move not just your office, because there's no reason why your office can't have clear definitions of who, what, where, why, all those questions, but also maybe help move the profession itself toward that, which will take time and energy and effort and direction and leadership and all of that. But it starts in your office. Let's start in your office. Make sure you're clear. about your message. Make sure you're clear to your patients about what you can do for them, and the rest of it will start falling in place.
So that really brings us to what you've been sort of hinting at. Here's some words of wisdom as we close out.
Yes, if we were to quote the poet and playwright William Yeats, think like a wise man, but communicate in the language of people.
What?
What'd you say?
Yeah, I couldn't understand you. All right, well, thank you again for listening to another episode of All Things Chiropractic. I'm Paul Andrews.
And Dr. Mark Davini, thank you.
Thanks for listening to All Things Chiropractic. We'd love to hear from you. Visit allthingschiropractic.com with comments, episode ideas, or questions. Or connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at All Things Chiropractic Podcast. Be sure to join Dr. Mark Davini and Paul Andrews next time for another episode of All Things Chiropractic.